denied entry to a luxury restaurant due to appearing out of place. The following day, a black SUV arrived, and no one anticipated who emerged. Charlotte's son was exhibiting his characteristic behavior in early spring, brilliant, somewhat showy, reflecting off every glass building downtown. Ideal weather for finalizing a deal. Cassandra Belton had recently concluded a walkthrough of a young couple's first home, a small three-bedroom with creaky floors and considerable potential. She found them appealing, these newlyweds, diligent individuals who still embraced the idea of constructing things from the foundations. She recognized aspects of herself within them. At 52, Cassandra had accomplished precisely that, establishing something from nothing. Without inherited wealth, she took no easy routes. Instead, she relied on time, perseverance, and a determination to continue. She wasn't ostentatious. Such displays weren't necessary for her. Her self-assurance manifested in her demeanor, in how she occupied silence in a room without needing to assert control. Following the showing, she drove 5 minutes to Le Mistral, a high-end restaurant on Tryon Street. She hadn't intended to dine there. It simply occurred to her as she stopped at the last traffic light. Indulge yourself, Cass, you deserve it. She parked her Lexus, glanced at her phone, and exited the vehicle. She wore no blazer, only a crisp white tee tucked into tailored dark jeans and gray suede flats. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she wore no makeup aside from gloss. The ensemble presented a polished and sophisticated aesthetic, suitable for both a casual cafe and a formal boardroom setting. The hostess provided a brief assessment, offered a rehearsed smile, and escorted her to a table for two situated by the window. The lunchtime rush hadn't begun. Cassandra reviewed the menu, already anticipating the grilled salmon with couscous. However, even before her water was served, he arrived. He seemed to be around 38 years old, with a strong jawline and slick-back hair and an excessive amount of cologne. His expression featured a smile that seemed to mask something deeper. "Ma'am," he said, approaching her table as if he'd practiced, "I'm afraid we have a dress code here." Cassandra looked up slowly. "Excuse me? The restaurant requires a particular standard. Our guests generally appreciate a more refined appearance." She blinked. "I'm wearing clean clothes, I smell like spring, and I just closed a $500,000 sale 2 blocks from here. I'd say I'm pretty refined." A pause. His smile became less relaxed. "We've received complaints." She tilted her head. Whose concerns were these? He looked toward the front desk, then back to her. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." There was no disturbance. Cassandra didn't raise her voice. She didn't weep. She posed a single question. Calmly, steadily. "Is it my clothes? Or is it my skin?" He didn't respond. Instead, he indicated toward security. A young man, clearly feeling awkward, approached and in a hushed tone requested that she collect her belongings. She rose, retrieved her purse, and exited. A heavy silence followed her every movement. Outside, she settled into her car, closed the door, and stared straight ahead for a significant period. She made no calls and created no videos. However, someone else did. A woman, seated in a corner booth near the bar, had observed the entire incident, recorded it, and uploaded it online, tagging the restaurant and local news outlets, along with numerous other accounts. By sundown, the video had accumulated 230,000 views. By midnight, it reached 2.3 million. Cassandra's phone began to receive numerous notifications. Her assistant, her nephew, clients, even someone from the Charlotte Observer had tried to reach her. But she didn't answer, because Cassandra wasn't going to react. She was going to respond. And those are two very different things. By the time the sun rose over Charlotte the next morning, Le Mistral had a problem. Not a small, quiet problem they could handle with a quick direct message or a vague apology. No, this was national. This was loud. The situation escalated to the point where legal counsel and public relations professionals were joining early morning Zoom meetings, even before their coffee was finished. The video itself was brief, just 37 seconds in length. It began with a composed black woman seated near a window, looking down at her menu. The restaurant appeared almost deserted. A quiet clinking of silverware could be heard in the background, along with the gentle sound of soft jazz. Then, he appeared, the manager. He approached as if offering a beverage, but his body language was inappropriate. His voice was understated and excessively courteous. There was a strange formality, the kind people adopt when they feel they've made a mistake but still want to maintain composure. The viewer didn't hear everything that was said, but they understood enough. Phrases like "we have a dress code" and "concern skew to leave" were audible. The camera subtly shifted, revealing Cassandra rising. She remained silent, simply gathering her purse. Then a single quiet sentence hung in the air. "Is it my clothes? Or is it my skin?" That was the pivotal moment. The entire comment section paused, replaying the scene and watching it again. That statement resonated unexpectedly with audiences. It wasn't delivered with raised voices. It wasn't a formal address, simply a question. Yet it had a powerful impact. Initially, Twitter reacted strongly. Subsequently, TikTok followed suit. Facebook then saw a wave of lengthy posts from individuals who had similar experiences. Gradually, people began investigating. Who was this woman? Why hadn't she previously spoken out? It emerged that Cassandra Belton wasn't just an ordinary customer. People started linking pieces of information together. She consistently ranked among the leading Black real estate brokers in Mecklenburg County. Last year, she was highlighted in Charlotte Real Estate Weekly. A quiet professional, she maintained a record free of controversy and sensationalism, building a career on consistent success and a reputation for ethical conduct. Several former clients shared their experiences. One recounted how she assisted her mother in purchasing a first home following the loss of her father. Another shared that she hadn't been charged the full commission, with the broker stating her desire to provide support. A third client also wrote, "Ms. Belton assisted me in resolving a difficult mortgage situation. She was invaluable. I consider her a remarkable person." Cassandra remained silent. Media representatives were stationed outside her office close to South Park. Her assistant denied them access. Respectfully but assertively, she stated that she was not prepared to release a statement. Le Mistral, however, issued several public statements. Initially, they released a routine message. "We are cognizant of an occurrence involving a patron and are assessing the issue internally." This statement was met with derision online. What happened? The video was clear. The woman didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. She didn't even finish her appetizer. And yet she was escorted out as if she'd caused a disturbance. The restaurant's Yelp and Google pages were inundated with one-star reviews. Apparently, racism was present. One person wrote a review. Another posted online, "Be mindful of your appearance or identity, it seems." The manager from the video, whose name eventually leaked, was Owen Lindley. He had been employed there for 3 years. Previously a hospitality manager in Naples, Florida, she was recognized for her stringent standards regarding presentation. An anonymous former employee of Le Mistral detailed an incident last year, alleging she subjected a Black couple to scrutiny, citing their shoes, Ferragamo, as a point of complaint. As controversy erupted online, Cassandra's name gained significant attention. Despite the public outcry, she remained silent. This wasn't due to fear, but rather a deliberate act of careful consideration and calculation. She had no desire for viral fame or symbolic representation. Her focus was on the long view. She had dedicated her life to creating something enduring and wouldn't allow one overbearing manager to reduce her to a trending topic. That afternoon, she finally settled at her kitchen table. Her laptop was open, and she read silently. She avoided checking the comments section and disregarded any memes. Instead, she focused on a single item, an email from a man she hadn't heard from in years. It read, "Cass, saw the video. You navigated the situation, as you always do, with quiet strength. Should you wish to take action regarding this matter, I am available to assist." The document was signed. Harlan Desmond, managing partner, Desmond and Klein Civil Rights Law. She studied the name for a moment. Then, a smile touched her lips. Because now, she was not alone. Many who viewed that video perceived grace and composure. However, those who had grown up with Cassandra Belton would understand the source of that grace and recognize that it had not been easily attained. Cassandra was raised in Southfield, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. She was raised by her mother, a retired elementary school teacher, and her father, who worked for 35 years at a Chrysler plant. Her parents emphasized listening over silence and instilled in her the understanding that calmness is a strategic tool, particularly for a Black woman navigating a world shaped by assumptions. Growing up, she observed her mother skillfully correcting others with a smile and her father successfully resolving disagreements without raising his voice. From these experiences, she developed the ability to carefully consider her words. She understood the value of choosing opportune times and allowing others to display their anxiety before revealing her own. By age 25, Cassandra had obtained her real estate license and was selling homes during her breaks at her banking job. Initially, she focused on smaller, more affordable properties, modest starter homes, often requiring renovation and offering future possibilities. People developed trust in her. She avoided exaggeration and never made misleading claims. Instead, she communicated honestly in a composed manner and consistently maintained her presence. Among her early clients was a recently divorced woman, trying to buy her first home on a single income. Cassandra remembered her vividly because the woman broke down, crying in her office after closing. "You were the first person who didn't treat me like a mistake," she said. Those moments stuck with her more than the commission checks ever did. So by the time she sat at her kitchen table in Charlotte, reading Harlan Desmond's email, Cassandra wasn't thinking about revenge. She considered how many individuals wouldn't have responded to the restaurant manager's demeanor as she did, and how many wouldn't have had the advantage of a stranger documenting the incident. Harlan was more than a lawyer. They had been classmates at Michigan State. He had been outspoken then, full of passion and protest signs. She was more reserved, more deliberate, but they held mutual respect for one another. And despite drifting apart over the years, she had continued to follow his career. Civil rights cases in Oakland, police discrimination suits in Tallahassee. He didn't employ a flamboyant courtroom style, but he was remarkably astute. She selected the reply button. Her message was concise. "Let's talk. Tomorrow." The following morning, they convened at a tranquil cafe in Dilworth. Cassandra wore the same white tee and jeans as she did at Le Mistral, as if she was conveying a message, but one only a select few would understand. Harlan was already present, black coffee in hand, eyes surveying the room. He rose as she entered. He made no comment about the video or the headlines. Instead, he gestured towards the seat opposite him. "So," he began, "tell me what you want." She paused briefly before responding, "I want change, but I want it to affect them negatively." He acknowledged her with a nod. "Financial, legal, reputational, everything," she confirmed. He smiled, but it wasn't arrogant. Then she suggested, "Let's start with the company that owns the building. If they're leasing to Le Mistral, they're responsible for what occurs on that property." Cassandra moved closer. "Let me investigate the manager," he stated. "However, yes, there are potential courses of action. Your removal from the business establishment at Giovanni's did not appear to violate policy. If the issue was related to attire, that's a matter of opinion. If it concerned anything else, that's a civil matter." Cassandra took a sip of her tea and inquired, "What about pursuing options beyond simply filing a claim? Do you mean involving the press?" He asked. "No," she replied. "I mean initiating a discussion, perhaps a meeting, something they wouldn't anticipate." He raised his eyebrows. "A formal meeting? With me? And several others?" "Who are these others?" she asked, a faint smile playing on her lips. "People who understand precisely what it's like to be me, and a few who don't, but need to." He hesitated. "Are you certain?" "I'm finished being considerate to safeguard other people's feelings," she stated. They were at ease when they caused me humiliation, and now she was finished prioritizing other people's comfort at her own expense. The following afternoon, lunchtime proceeded with its typical cadence at Le Mistral. Waiters moved silently between tables, carrying trays of sparkling water and pan-seared halibut. The dining room was filled with the sounds of clinking silverware and quiet conversations. Owen Lindley, the manager, stood behind the host's stand, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning every corner as if anticipating something, though he couldn't say what. Then, a black Cadillac Escalade arrived in front of the restaurant, its windows darkly tinted, reflecting the sidewalk. Initially, no one noticed. This was a place accustomed to seeing high-end cars coming and going. However, the valet paused. As the back door opened, the air seemed to shift subtly. Cassandra Belton emerged first. Her attire mirrored the previous days: white tee, jeans, and suede flats. However, she now wore a long beige trench coat over her clothing. She moved with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer felt the need to prove anything. Following her, 3 more people exited the vehicle. Harlan Desmond, holding a briefcase. A woman in her 60s with thick silver braids and a serious expression. Dr. Renee Darnell, sociology professor and longtime advocate for racial equity in public spaces, was also present. And last, Andre Weiss, regional director for a high-profile real estate investment group, arrived, sharply dressed in navy slacks and a linen shirt. He had no interest in speaking to the press. His firm owned the building Le Mistral rented. Inside, Owen observed the scene from behind the glass doors, his face paling. He turned to his assistant manager and quietly mentioned needing to make a call. However, the opportunity had passed. Cassandra entered the front door without acknowledging anyone, as if she belonged there. This visit wasn't for a meal. She was there to speak. The maitre d' was stunned. "Mom, we're expected," Cassandra stated, her voice calm yet resolute. Andre approached, gestured to the staff, and added, "Conference room, please." It was important to tell Mr. Lindley he should probably be present. The staff offered no objections. 10 minutes later, within the private upstairs room, typically used for wine tastings and corporate parties, the 5 of them gathered around a polished oak table. Water was served. The door shut. And for the first time, Owen Lindley felt somewhat insignificant. Harlan opened a slim folder and presented a printed copy of the restaurant's dress code. Thus, he began, turning the page. White t-shirts. Prohibited? Owen shifted uncomfortably. "We prefer collared shirts," Harlan repeated, "but not required." He added, "Well, it's about tone, too. Presentation. We have a standard." Harlan nodded toward Cassandra, stating, "Your client is a well-known businesswoman in this community." He continued, "No signs of intoxication. No disruptive behavior." She sat down, quietly reviewed the menu, and was removed. Owen shifted in his seat. "It wasn't personal," he said. "I didn't ask if it was personal," Cassandra said, interrupting for the first time. "I repeatedly questioned myself, wondering if I had entered the space with a different complexion. Would you have reacted identically?" A profound silence followed. Andre moved closer. "We are not simply engaged in a conversation. This constitutes a breach of the lease agreement. This restaurant functions with a non-discrimination clause stipulated within our leasing terms. You may be the manager, Mr. Lindley, but I represent the organization that owns this building, and we're evaluating your standing." Owen's mouth opened, but he remained silent. Dr. Darnell then spoke. The incident wasn't isolated. It highlighted the danger of misinterpreting quietude as vulnerability. You anticipated her absence, believing the matter would disappear. However, she didn't require loud pronouncements to be acknowledged. She simply needed to remain present long enough for others to observe you. Owen attempted to dismiss. "Look, if she desires an apology, I don't want your apology," Cassandra stated. "I want accountability, and a change in how people are treated here. Not just me. To all present." The interaction proceeded calmly, without raised voices or legal warnings. 5 individuals were fully aware of their actions, and one man abruptly understood he no longer held authority. Owen Lindley remained still, his shoulders drawn, the knot of his tie subtly pressing against his throat. He was accustomed to being in command. Generally, his voice commanded respect, appearing resolute and conclusive. However, within this room, among these people, it lacked its usual impact. It simply wasn't the same. Harlan Desmond relaxed in his chair, allowing a pause to linger. Next, he put 2 sheets of paper onto the table. Page 1, he stated, is a compilation of grievances submitted by former employees and visitors at this location during the last 18 months. Numerous entries concern dress code regulations. One specifically names you, Mr. Lindley. Owen did not take the papers. Harlan continued, pushing the second sheet across the table. This is a draft of a formal letter that could be submitted to your building's management and shared with local media. It explains how bias, whether intentional or unintentional, has been a recurring issue, not an isolated incident. Yes, Owen began. We don't expect you to apologize, Cassandra added, her voice calm. This isn't about revenge. It's about correcting a problem. Consider this an opportunity for positive change rather than a criticism. Dr. Darnell then addressed the group. We reside in a city striving to be perceived as progressive, inclusive, and globally aware. However, incidents such as this reveal underlying realities. The important aspect isn't the initial error, but the actions taken afterward. Andre Weiss, who had remained largely silent until this point, finally moved closer. The board responsible for this property will convene next week. We will be reviewing your lease. Cassandra's situation might be the one captured on video, but we will be looking at the wider context. This includes staff turnover, guest feedback, and Owen's voice faltered slightly when he finally asked, What do you want? Cassandra met his gaze. A public apology, not a generic statement from your PR firm. Your voice, your face. Take responsibility, Owen. Owen blinked. That's acceptable. Cassandra continued, I want to meet with the staff, front and back of house, not to lecture, but to talk about what hospitality really means, what dignity means. Owen nodded slowly, but Harlan raised a hand. That means a formal arrangement, not a photo op, no cameras, just people learning how not to repeat the same mistake. Finally, Cassandra added, she wanted the restaurant to fund a quarterly dining program providing complimentary culinary experiences for underserved high school students with an interest in the food industry. Both front of house and back of house positions would be included, allowing them to experience a welcoming environment where they often feel excluded. Owen hesitated. That's a significant undertaking. It's a reasonable proposal, Andre stated before Cassandra could reply. To be direct, if I had sole decision-making power, I would suggest ending the lease completely. I viewed this as a gesture of goodwill. The atmosphere changed noticeably, not due to any increase in physical weight, but because Owen finally grasped the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't centered on him personally, it concerned what he symbolized. And what Cassandra was undertaking was more than just a reaction. It was a fundamental change. He cleared his throat, then stated, Okay, I will proceed. No, Cassandra responded, her tone measured. You will initiate it. The distinction is significant. The assembly rose deliberately. Documents were gathered. The water glasses seemed half empty. The room felt strangely calm, but not empty. Something had occurred here, something shifted. As they left the conference room, a young waitress caught Cassandra's eye. She appeared to be no older than 23. The waitress remained silent, offering only a small nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but respect. Cassandra returned a smile, just enough to signal that she recognized her presence. While the main dining room downstairs continued serving truffle risotto and wine, a change was already underway, whether the restaurant was aware or not. The restaurant's apology video was released the next morning. It was brief, lasting just under 2 minutes. The video was filmed inside Le Mistral's main dining room, with the bar visible in the background. Owen Lindley appeared standing in front of a small round table, his shoulders square, but his face visibly strained. The video utilized no dramatic lighting and avoided flashy editing. A man appeared, looking as if he hadn't rested properly in days. My name is Owen Lindley, he began, and I want to speak directly to Ms. Cassandra Belton, and to anyone who saw the video of our interaction. He spoke without a prepared text. This was evident. His delivery was occasionally halting, but these imperfections only served to strengthen his words. He confessed the truth, that he had formed a judgment based on appearance, that he responded emotionally rather than thoughtfully, that he permitted personal prejudice to supersede policy and professionalism. Then he made the unexpected declaration. I didn't perceive her. Truly. And that's the crux of the matter. The internet erupted almost instantly. Concerns arose. Was the apology sincere? Was it too delayed? A deliberate tactic? However, the most impactful element for many viewers wasn't Owen. It was Cassandra, who published a written statement 1 hour later. The statement was brief, consisting of just 4 paragraphs on her business website. There were no hashtags. It lacked a viral feel. She didn't boast. She didn't seek compassion. She simply detailed the events. This is what she requested and what the restaurant committed to providing. She specifically highlighted the new program for aspiring culinary students at Willow Creek Culinary Institute. She also expressed her gratitude to the ownership group of the Golden Spoon for collaborating with her directly. Finally, in a concluding line, she wrote, "Dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you carry. And when it's denied, you don't always need to fight to get it back. Sometimes you just need to stand still long enough for people to see it was always there." The written announcement gained traction even more rapidly than the video itself. Cassandra's inbox was overwhelmed once more. However, this time it was distinct. Local charitable organizations contacted her, seeking collaboration on the Student Dining Initiative. A restaurant group in Seattle inquired if she would address their leadership team. Even the mayor's office conveyed a discreet message, acknowledging her actions. However, not all reactions were positive. Some individuals asserted that she was exploiting the situation, either by attributing racial undertones or capitalizing on the opportunity. A commentator on a local news segment accused her of attempting to dismiss a dedicated manager. Cassandra did not respond to these accusations. Instead, she prioritized the students. The initial event occurred just 3 weeks afterward. 15 high school juniors and seniors from West Charlotte and Harding University High arrived at La Mistral after hours, accompanied by their culinary arts teachers. The staff had thoroughly cleaned the kitchen. 3 chefs generously donated their time to instruct the students on plating, preparation, and service. Cassandra remained largely quiet that evening, moving between tables and observing them slice, stir, and taste with focused expressions. One student, a girl just under 5 feet tall with purple braids and intense concentration, turned to her after trying her initial attempt at risotto and exclaimed, "I didn't even know food could taste like this." Cassandra smiled and replied, "It can. And so can opportunity." Meanwhile, Owen was not present at the restaurant that evening. Following the incident, he was transitioned away from daily operations and now holds a limited administrative position at the corporate office. This wasn't a dramatic dismissal, but rather a quiet consequence, precisely the outcome Cassandra had intended. Her aim wasn't to destroy someone's life, but to ensure they lived with a lasting reminder. That reminder now manifested as 15 eager young students, laughing and learning inside a restaurant that had once attempted to exclude someone like them. The situation seemed almost unbelievable. The very establishment that had previously rejected Cassandra due to not aligning with its perceived atmosphere was now undergoing a noticeable change, occurring one table, one lesson at a time. 2 months later, Cassandra was standing outside a quiet little cafe in Durham, North Carolina, enjoying a courte-à-deux while awaiting her lunch date. This was not a business engagement. She had taken the day off. She had driven 2 hours from Charlotte simply to clear her head and connect with an old friend. The events surrounding La Mistral were in the past for her. Largely, the video was no longer prominent on trending lists. The restaurant had recovered under a new temporary manager, and the student culinary program, it continued with another session planned for next month. Cassandra had decided she would no longer supervise it directly. It was now in the hands of the students. As she sat beneath the awning, sunlight spreading across the pavement, a young woman wearing a UNC hoodie passed by, slowed, and turned back. "Excuse me, are you Cassandra Belton?" Cassandra looked up. She nodded once. The girl offered a wide smile. "I saw your video, the one involving the restaurant. I simply wanted to express my gratitude. You presented things authentically, like a mature woman would." Cassandra laughed quietly. That's a way to describe it. No, truly. You conveyed your message without creating unnecessary drama. My aunt speaks of you as if you were Michelle Obama's older relative. They both chuckled. The girl waved goodbye, maintaining her smile. Cassandra didn't require external approval. That moment held significance, not due to vanity, but because it indicated that the appropriate individuals were observing. The next generation was noting how matters were being addressed. Subsequently, that afternoon, she entered a small bistro located across the street for lunch. The host, a man in his 20s with a nose ring and slightly frayed cuffs on his sleeves, looked up and offered her a sincere smile. "Welcome," he said. "Are you dining alone or expecting someone?" "Alone," she replied. A window seat was acceptable, ideal even. He took a menu and guided her to a booth where sunlight streamed across the table. He didn't pause. He didn't scrutinize her attire. Her outfit consisted of a simple linen shirt and cream-colored slacks. As he went to fetch her water, Cassandra surveyed the restaurant. A couple murmured quietly near the back. Two women enjoyed a dessert together. A man on his laptop typed rapidly, as if the world was about to end. It was normal, ordinary, beautiful in its simplicity. She recalled that day at Le Mistral, the shift in Owen Lindley's expression, the subtle encouragement she received, the critical commentary as well, the burden of being thrust into a pivotal moment when all she desired was lunch. She held no regrets, because that moment had shown her and reminded others that silence isn't the lack of strength. Sometimes it's the most profound kind of strength, the kind that listens, that waits, that observes, anticipating the opportune moment to act. And when it acts, it seeks no authorization. She retrieved her phone and launched her notes application. A sentence appeared at the top of a fresh page. "Don't waste your voice on noise. Save it for the echo." She remembered hearing that from her mother years ago. It wasn't about remaining silent. It was about being thoughtful. Be precise. Utilize your presence like a scalpel, not a hammer. As the waiter returned with her water and a polite, "Take your time," Cassandra smiled. She didn't need to assert herself today. She didn't need to demonstrate anything. She had already accomplished that. And in doing so, she left a lasting impact, not only on a restaurant, but on everyone who witnessed her maintain her composure without aggression, who observed the power of choosing dignity over conflict and still achieving success. That was the core understanding. Change doesn't always require a loud voice. It requires remaining steadfast until others understand the significance of silence. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Discuss it with others. If you haven't already, please subscribe. More stories like this, the quiet ones that speak loudest, are forthcoming. The dog appeared to be solely for emotional support, but when the child performed a quiet signal, the dog revealed a truth that had remained unspoken. The courtroom in Toledo, Ohio, felt overwhelmingly large for her. 8-year-old Tanya Ellison sat upright in her chair, her feet dangling above the floor, holding the leash of her golden retriever, Milo, firmly in her hands. Her braids were neatly done, and her pink barrettes made a quiet clicking sound with any head movement. She spoke little, showed no signs of nervousness, simply remained still and observant, appearing remarkably composed for a child in a room filled with unfamiliar faces, awaiting a discussion of subject no child should need to comprehend. Beside her, Milo remained motionless as well. He sat close, his eyes partially closed, his comforting presence against her leg. Many assumed the dog's purpose was to ease her anxiety and provide a sense of security within the imposing environment. And while that was a contributing factor, there was a deeper significance, far more than met the eye. From a bench, Judge Mark Halbard looked down. He was in his 60s, his gray hair thinning and his glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. Throughout his career, he had presided over numerous cases, gang violence, difficult family court proceedings, and even widely publicized trials. However, something about this young girl held his complete attention. Perhaps it was the calm focus in her eyes, or perhaps it was the dog, or maybe it was the fact that not a single person in the courtroom, even the defense attorney, was able to elicit a reaction from her. The room held a considerable number of people, enough that quiet murmurs occasionally arose as someone moved closer to whisper. Seated on the left was the defendant, Russell Banning, a man in his late 40s with short hair, a pressed shirt, and his hands carefully placed in his lap. His lawyer repeatedly tapped a pen against the table, anticipating the cross-examination. Tanya had not yet glanced at Russell. Kendra Ellison, her mother, was seated 2 rows back, quietly holding a tissue in one hand and a cross necklace in the other. She hadn't uttered a word since entering the building, simply keeping her gaze fixed on her daughter, hoping the moment would quickly pass. She feared it wouldn't. Judge Hal barred, then cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ellison, are you ready?" Tanya glanced at her court-appointed therapist, who offered a slight nod from the front bench. She did not return the smile, only offered a single nod. "Yes, Your Honor," the therapist responded on her behalf. "She is ready." The judge nodded briefly and turned to the bailiff. "Bring the witness." A door opened to the side, and 2 officers entered. The man accused of changing Tanya's life walked deliberately to the stand, attempting to appear calm, but his eyes repeatedly darted toward Milo, and Milo, who had been entirely relaxed until that moment, raised his head. Tanya didn't react, though her hold on the leash became a little firmer. No one observed it. The prosecutor rose, straightened her jacket, and started her questioning. "Mr. Banning, can you state where you were on the night of August 14th? Russell moved closer to the microphone. "At home, watching TV. "Alone?" "Yes." "And do you expect us to simply accept that?" He relaxed against the chair. "I'm being truthful." From the visitor's area, Kendra's hand squeezed the tissue once more. Tanya avoided his gaze, yet her breathing altered a delicate, regulated rhythm, as if deliberately cultivating composure. The interrogation continued, initially focusing on establishing sequences of events. Then, the photographs were presented, images that should never be displayed in a courtroom. Tanya averted her eyes. Milo moved nearer to her. The atmosphere in the room diminished. The weight of the moment was palpable, not from the spoken words, but from their absence. Russell subtly adjusted his position. He asserted that her account was fabricated, interrupting the prosecutor's subsequent inquiry. "That dog," he commented, "is simply trained to respond. This entire situation is a fabrication." At that moment, Tanya deliberately raised her hand, positioning it behind her back. She then tapped her fingers twice, gently. The movement was subtle, barely perceptible. A missed blink would have meant overlooking it entirely. Milo's ears immediately rose. However, none of the individuals present anticipated what he would do next. Approximately 2 months prior to the court proceedings, Tanya was seated on a folding chair in her aunt's backyard in Decatur, Georgia, observing Milo pursue a red tennis ball across the lawn. The sun was beginning its descent, bathing the surroundings in a golden hue. She held the ball in her hand, but refrained from throwing it. Not yet. Her aunt, Carla Newsom, stood nearby with her arms crossed, a gentle smile gracing her features. Carla was resilient. A retired canine handler, she had previously worked in narcotics in Dallas before relocating closer to family. Around Tanya, that rigidity eased. Carla knelt beside her and met her gaze. "Are you certain you want to do this, dear?" she asked. "We don't have to if you're not ready." Tanya didn't respond immediately. She looked at Milo again, now lying on his back in the grass, tail thumping. Then she looked back at her aunt. "I don't want him to look at me," she said quietly. Carla nodded. "Then we'll teach Milo how to watch for you." It started gradually with simple games. Carla would often sit on the opposite side of the yard with a companion, role-playing as if they didn't know each other. If Tanya tapped her left shoe one time, Milo would remain still. If she tapped twice behind her back, Milo was trained to move and position himself between her and the person in front of her. This required consistent effort. Each day following school, and every weekend. Tanya was reserved, but she demonstrated a strong focus. Milo learned rapidly. He possessed a calm demeanor, intelligence, and above all, unwavering loyalty. Whenever he noticed Tanya exhibiting tension, he would instinctively move nearer. A strong bond was forming between them, a quiet and specialized team with a shared, unspoken mission. Carla observed them from the porch, occasionally recording observations, and, at other times, allowing them undisturbed time. On one evening following their work, Carla offered Tanya a bottle of water and sat close to her. "You need to understand that in court they may question your account," she stated cautiously. "Adults often feel anxious. They resist being proven incorrect." Tanya averted her gaze. "What if I make a mistake?" Carla reassured her. "You won't. And should you become overwhelmed, that's why Milo is present." He intended for them to recall his perspective. A moment of stillness followed. Then, an unusual inquiry from Tanya arose. "Do you believe he recalls what he inflicted upon me?" Carla remained silent. She preferred not to deceive. Therefore, she responded, "Perhaps not as you do, but individuals like him retain enough to be apprehensive of the truth." That evening, Kendra arrived to collect Tanya. Her gaze was weary, posture slumped. Carla drew her away before she re-entered the vehicle. "She possesses greater resilience than appears," Carla murmured. "Ensure she isn't bearing this burden by herself. When a moment arrives, meet that man directly." Kendra acknowledged, though her lips shook. Prior to their departure, Tanya returned and embraced Carla. "Thank you," she whispered against her shirt. Carla held her a little longer than normal. The day preceding the court appearance, they conducted one final meeting. Carla wore an old hoodie and mirrored sunglasses, attempting to replicate the courtroom environment. She even rehearsed a few assertive phrases she envisioned a lawyer might use. It wasn't ideal, but it provided assistance. Tanya signaled Milo. Milo positioned himself between her and Carla, remaining steadfast, vigilant, unwavering. Carla felt a constriction in her throat. "Okay," she stated, her voice softer than normal. It was one thing to be prepared, and another entirely to witness it unfold in actuality. Back in that courtroom in Toledo, Tanya remained perfectly still. Milo, now attentive, hadn't moved since she gave the double tap. Russell Banning observed a change in his posture, moving from relaxed to protective. His head rose, his chest moved forward, and his eyes focused intently on the man seated across the room. He subtly leaned away, holding the witness stand's edge. His expression grew strained, though he attempted to mask it with a forced smile. The gesture was not returned, neither by the jury, nor by the judge, nor even by his own attorney, who briefly looked at the dog with a worried twitch in his jaw. Andrea Selden, the prosecutor, paused briefly before resuming. "Mr. Banning, you previously testified that you were by yourself on August 14th. There were no witnesses and no communication records like phone calls or text messages. Is that still your account?" Russell moved his chair. "That is what I stated, yes." Andrea approached him. "You also affirmed that you had never encountered the minor involved in this case, correct?" His gaze momentarily moved towards Tanya. "Correct. I'm not familiar with her." "Never spoken to her?" "No." "Never visited her school?" I said no. The atmosphere in the room became more subdued. The quiet rustling of papers had ceased. Every gaze was fixed on Tanya. She remained looking down, but Milo hadn't diverted his eyes from Russell. Not once. Judge Halberd leaned forward a little. Andrea turned to Tanya, her voice softening. "Tanya, do you feel safe right now?" Tanya didn't speak. Instead, she reached down and touched Milo's back. He didn't move, but the growl was so quiet, it almost sounded like a tremor. Just enough to be heard, enough to shatter the silence. Russell blinked. "I want to be clear," Andrea stated, maintaining a calm tone. The dog had been specifically trained for her protection, under the direction of a certified canine handler. He is not reacting to anxiety, but to behavior. Gerald Lasky, the defense attorney, abruptly stood. "Objection. This is speculative." Judge Halberd raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Lasky. You will have your opportunity." Gerald resumed his seat, appearing unassured. Andrea approached the bench and picked up a small folder. "Pursuant to the court's approval, I would like to present a short video documenting Tanya's therapy sessions." "Permission granted," the judge stated. The screen descended behind the witness stand. A video commenced playing. It depicted Tanya in her aunt's backyard, peacefully walking with Milo. Carla appeared in the frame, portraying different scenarios. One tap, Milo remained by her side. Two taps, he advanced, his demeanor shifting similarly to how it had been in court. Following the video's conclusion, a significant silence ensued. Judge Halberd then addressed Russell directly. I have presided over many trials. I have encountered numerous courtroom dogs, therapy animals, and trained service animals. However, I have never witnessed an animal react with such immediate instinct. Russell attempted to speak, but remained silent. Tanya then raised her gaze, deliberately and quietly. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle. He does not speak loudly. He only whispers. Andrea turned towards her with kindness. Who, dear? Tanya indicated the man on the stand. Him. A profound silence filled the courtroom. Russell rose quickly. This is a fabrication. Are you allowing a child and a dog to determine my fate? Milo advanced, his growl intensifying. The bailiff intervened swiftly. Sir, please be seated. However, Russell remained standing. He increased his volume. This isn't factual material. It's maneuvering, Milo stated, with a single distinct bark. The judge struck his gavel. Sufficient. Any further disruptions, and you will be ejected from this courtroom. Russell retreated to his chair, his face ashen. He mumbled something quietly, but it was inaudible. The jury observed intently, motionless. Tanya leaned back in her chair, her hand still on Milo's back. She remained silent. However, the truth was no longer concealed within the evidence or legal language. It was now plainly visible to all. One could sense the gravity of the situation. It wasn't a boisterous moment. It wasn't theatrical. It was silent, as if the atmosphere in the courtroom had been suddenly removed. Judge Halbert straightened his glasses and looked toward the bailiff. Let's take a 5-minute recess. He addressed the jurors. Please remain seated. The gavel struck the desk, yet there was no movement. There was no whispering, no throat clearing, only silence. Milo stood motionless, positioned before Tanya, gazing intently at Russell Banning as if he possessed prior knowledge of the outcome. Carla, positioned behind the barrier, made eye contact with her niece. She offered a slight nod, not to influence her, but to signal her presence. Weeks earlier, she had explained to Tanya that you don't need to be loud to anyone. The truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it simply observes. That's what Milo was doing currently, observing, remaining still. Across the room, Russell was falling apart. He pulled at his collar, adjusted his posture, and spoke quietly to his attorney. His voice had changed, now more pointed and uncertain. The composed demeanor he's arrived with was gone, replaced by a noticeable unease. It was obvious to everyone. Your Honor, Andrea said softly, easing the strain. Could the child please stay seated here with her support animal during the break? The judge nodded. She may remain seated as long as she is comfortable. Gerald Lasky, still red-faced, leaned toward Russell, whispering intensely. But his client appeared to be sweating now. Milo hadn't moved. He didn't bark again. He didn't growl again. He didn't need to. The prosecutor approached Carla close to the bench. Was that signal scheduled for today? Carla didn't blink. It was always a last resort. She had never used it until now. Andrea nodded slowly. He must have triggered it without even knowing. She knew what to look for, Carla said. He must have done it before. Back at the bench, Judge Halberd reviewed the footage again quietly on his monitor. His lips tightened. He'd been on the bench long enough to know that not all evidence fits neatly into paper or testimony. Sometimes it walks on 4 legs and growls when a child is too afraid to speak. Following the recess, the proceedings restarted as if no interruption had occurred. However, a change was palpable. Your Honor, Andrea stated, rising to her feet, with your permission, I would like to recall Detective Lorna Morales to the stand for a brief clarification. Proceed, the judge responded. Detective Morales approached, her boots making a quiet clicking sound on the tile. She had been involved in the investigation from the beginning, when the available evidence consisted of a nebulous assertion and a child hesitant to articulate their account. Earlier, her statement had been concise. Andrea presented her with a printed photograph. "Detective, is this familiar to you?" Morales examined the image. It depicted Russell Banning at an elementary school field day, Tanya's school. He was not an employee. He was not a parent. He was simply a guest volunteer coordinated through a now-defunct mentorship program. Was this man permitted access to the children without supervision during the event? Andrea inquired. No, Morales stated directly. He was not. And was he discovered in a classroom alone with a student? Yes, Tanya Ellison. There it was. That was the moment Milo shifted again. His ears twitched. His body leaned forward just slightly, defensively again. Every juror's eyes followed that subtle movement. Andrea turned to the jury. You observe the video. You observe the training. You observe the dog's instinct. Now you see why Russell stood up again. This is absurd. This is emotional manipulation. The bailiff took a step forward. Judge Halbert's voice rose. Mr. Banning, please be seated. You're not permitted to speak again unless directly addressed. However, Russell couldn't restrain himself. She is fabricating the story, fabricating it all with that dog. Milo advanced one step, displaying no bark, no growl, only his presence. It was then that a shift occurred. A single juror, an older woman wearing a blue sweater, removed her glasses and massaged her temples. Her gaze turned toward another juror, a younger man in his 30s. A shared understanding passed between them, as if a crucial element had finally aligned. However, what followed extended beyond simple validation. It concerned revealing the truth about this man and uncovering any concealed aspects of his character. The courtroom was now engrossed, anticipating each movement, observing every respiration, each involuntary gesture, and every look from Russell Banning. The jury members were no longer relaxed. They were intently focused. Judge Halbert massaged his eyes behind his spectacles. He remained largely silent, yet it was evident a change had occurred within him as well. He had witnessed numerous defendants falter under questioning, but Russell wasn't merely breaking. He was falling apart before their eyes. Andrea stepped back to the podium, her voice even and composed. Detective Morales, did you interview any other parents who observed Mr. Banning interacting with students that day? Morales responded, yes, 3 in total. Someone reported giving a child candy without authorization. Another stated they followed a student into the restroom. Was that student identified? Morales confirmed. Yes. You could hear someone in the gallery whisper, my God. Judge Halbert did not issue a reprimand. He remained silent. Gerald Lasky, attempting to reassert himself, rose. Your Honor, this is speculative. None of those allegations were substantiated, Andrea countered. The statements remained unchallenged, each one delivered before the victim had a chance to respond. Lasky's objection lingered, but it was not sustained. He then took his seat. Andrea turned back to the judge. I request permission to recall the school counselor, Ms. Jenna Holbrook, for follow-up, she stated. Granted, replied Halbert. Ms. Holbrook approached the stand with a quiet seriousness. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, with a thin but clear voice. She adjusted her blazer and spoke directly. Following the school event, I saw Tanya on several occasions. While she was quiet, she frequently drew. Her drawings consistently featured the same man, glasses, shirt, and always positioned behind her. Andrea presented the drawing to the judge and jury. Though a child's artwork, the likeness was undeniable. It depicted Russell with the same square glasses and jawline. Notably, next to a small representation of herself was a dog, Milo. She hadn't encountered Milo before this, correct? Andrea questioned, but not until weeks passed. A silence followed. Then Andrea faced Russell. Mr. Banning, can you clarify how a child you assert you've never encountered described you, including your glasses, weeks prior to any legal actions? Russell's lips parted. He closed them, then opened them again. I'm unsure, he mumbled. Perhaps she's disoriented or recalling something, Andrea suggested. The jury remained impassive. The entire courtroom did. Immediately afterward, the courtroom doors swung open. A woman entered discreetly and presented a note to the bailiff. He examined the note, then proceeded directly to the judge. Halbert received the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read it carefully. His eyebrows rose a little. "Ms. Selden," he stated, "it seems another person has come forward during the break. A former teacher's assistant from Hickory Trail Elementary. She asserts she possesses information directly relevant to this case. She's outside, prepare to testify." Andrea turned her head slowly toward Russell. Remarkably, Hickory Trail falls outside of this jurisdiction. Russell visibly struggled, his jaw tightening. Gerald Lasky moved closer, whispering to his client. Russell dismissed him. "Nobody here knows anything," he mumbled. "She's simply attempting to damage my reputation." Andrea stepped away. The doors opened once more. A woman, appearing to be in her early 30s, entered. Bridget Alston, her identification tag still attached to her coat. She assumed the witness stand, took the oath, and commenced her testimony. "I remember him," she stated, indicating Russell. "He volunteered at our school for 3 months in 2019. We received complaints, several, but they never resulted in action because people didn't want to trust the children." Judge Halberd moved closer. "Did you file a report?" "Yes, on 2 occasions, but I was instructed not to escalate the matter." Andrea paused, allowing the jury a moment to process this information. Then Milo made a sudden, brief single bark. Russell visibly reacted. Tanya remained still. Without raising her head, she extended her hand and gave Milo a deliberate, comforting scratch behind the ears. The courtroom now comprehended. Milo's actions weren't erratic. He wasn't displaying distress. He was reacting purposefully, naturally, and with intention. However, what remained unknown was that the ultimate determination wouldn't be derived from the documented evidence. It would stem from the jury's visceral understanding. The courtroom was no longer impartial. It had taken a position, subtly but undeniably. The atmosphere was palpable, evident in the juror's posture, the judge's gesture of pressing his fingertips together, and the measured silence of Andrea Selden, which spoke volumes. The evidence was presented, but it was the responses that resonated. Milos's, Tanya's, and Russell's cut through the surrounding tension. Judge Halberd addressed the jury box, stating, "We will break for deliberation immediately. Jurors, you will be escorted to the conference room." As the jurors rose and exited, Russell slumped heavily into his chair. A slight tremor ran through his hands, though he attempted to conceal it by adjusting his cuffs. Gerald Lasky murmured something to him once more, but Russell offered no reply. His gaze was fixed on Tanya, and she, remaining silent and composed, averted her head. Milo settled back into a relaxed posture, his body curled beside her, his head resting on her shoe, as if the storm had subsided. As if his duties were complete, temporarily, the gallery stayed silent. The room remained still, save for Carla, who rose to stretch and walked over, placing a gentle hand on her sister's shoulder. Kendra hadn't seemed to breathe since the testimony began. Her fingers were red from repeated twisting. "You did well," Carla whispered. "You did better," she responded. The jury had been absent for almost 2 hours. Upon their return, the bailiff brought the room to order. Judge Halberd appeared more weary than previously, but his voice remained firm. "Have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with a weathered suit and a tight jaw, rose. "We do, Your Honor." The question came, "And how do you find the defendant, Russell Banning, on the count of criminal misconduct with a minor?" "Guilty," the foreman stated, the word falling with a weighty certainty. It resonated, clear enough for all present. "Regarding the count of trespassing on school property with intent to harm?" "Guilty." Russell Banning's shoulders slumped. He remained silent, offering no outburst. The outburst had ceased. Only a sense of quiet acceptance lingered. Andrea shut her binder. There were no celebratory gestures, no smiles, just a feeling of relief. Securing a case such as this doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like air flowing back into a space that was suffocated for too long. Judge Halberd addressed Tanya. "Ms. Ellison, I observe that you spoke sparingly today, but you conveyed more than many adults ever manage. And I believe you." Tanya remained composed, but she nodded. "And Milo, Halberd peered over his glasses. I've never expressed this in a courtroom, but if I possessed a medal to award, he would be wearing it. A few people chuckled softly for the first time in hours. Subsequently, in the hallway outside the courtroom, reporters assembled. Microphones, cameras, the typical commotion. Kendra moved protectively before her daughter. No questions today, she stated firmly. We're simply going home. Carla opened the passenger door. Milo entered first. Then Tanya climbed in beside him. The car ride home was quiet. Carla remained silent. Kendra didn't press. However, halfway along the highway, Tanya spoke up. Will he go away forever? Kendra glanced in the rearview mirror. I don't know, baby, but he won't hurt you again. That's for sure. Tanya stroked Milo's fur. He licked her hand. Upon arriving home, Carla hung up her coat and reached for the leash to walk Milo. Tanya followed her to the door. Can I come? You don't have to. I want to. Beneath a pale sky, they walked in silence. There were no cars, no barking, only the sound of gravel beneath their shoes. At one moment, Tanya paused and looked upwards. Do you think other kids are scared like I was? Carla nodded. Tanya fell silent for a moment. Then she inquired, Can we teach other dogs, too? Carla regarded her. This little girl who had once gone completely silent, now formulating plans. Yeah, she replied softly. I think we can. But this story wasn't simply about a dog or a courtroom. The focus was on the moment a child's experiences are finally validated, and when staying silent isn't the only path to safety. 2 weeks following the trial, subtle changes began to emerge. These weren't dramatic or obvious, but appeared in minor details that only a select few observed. Tanya was able to sleep soundly through the night without any awakenings. Kendra ceased the habit of leaving all the lights on in the house. And Milo, he stopped standing watch outside Tanya's bedroom door. He settled on her rug instead, peaceful, understanding his girl no longer needed to sleep with her shoes on. However, recovery isn't always linear. One afternoon, while Carla and Tanya were organizing dog toys in the living room, a letter arrived. Carla held the letter, glancing over to Tanya, who was now guiding Milo to stay with a simple hand signal. You did that, she remarked. Tanya looked up. No, we did. Carla smiled and settled down beside her. You know what most people forget? She continued. Adults don't always have the answers. She paused. But when kids speak, even if it's frightening, even if it's chaotic, it stirs something in everyone else. Tanya considered this briefly, then murmured, I didn't think anyone would believe me. Carla nodded. That's why your input was particularly valuable. Later that week, they went back to the backyard for the first time since Milo's training. Carla brought out an old duffel bag filled with harnesses and treats, and Tanya brought her sketch pad. She sat under the tree, sketching out commands, hand signals, and little notes only she could understand. Milo dozed nearby, one paw twitching in his sleep. Kendra came outside, holding 2 lemonades. I was thinking, she said, handing one to Carla. Perhaps we could discuss partnering with a local shelter and see if they would allow us to train a couple of dogs there. It would be a small undertaking, just a trial run. Carla raised her eyebrows. Are you certain? Kendra replied with a half smile. Yes, but I'm tired of being afraid. A few months later, they were conducting weekend sessions at a small training field in the city park. They called it Signals, and word spread slowly. Parents brought kids, shelters brought dogs. Some of the children didn't talk much, some didn't talk at all. Without fail, they appeared every Saturday. Even Milo, despite his advancing age, consistently attended. He remained silent, offering no barks or growls, but observed attentively. Tanya would position herself at the forefront, notebook in hand, providing instructions in concise, easily understood steps. A microphone was unnecessary. People drew near to listen. Periodically, she would look towards Carla, seeking confirmation. Carla would respond with a thumbs up, or occasionally simply offer silent encouragement if you got this. And Tanya succeeded. Individuals who had learned about the case would approach Tanya in public. Some offered thanks, while others remained silent, simply smiling and departing. Tanya didn't require recognition, She found satisfaction in the possibility that someone, somewhere, might now be more likely to believe child. One evening, while closing up the field, Carla asked her, "Do you ever wish that day in court had unfolded differently?" Tanya looked up from brushing Milo's fur. No, not even a little. She shook her head. If it hadn't occurred as it did, nobody would have witnessed who he truly was. Carla paused. The quiet confidence she held for her niece continued to surprise her. Prior to leaving, they paused before the small painted sign near the gate. It displayed Sig Nulls in red, with a paw print substituting the A. This was Tanya's suggestion. Carla placed her hand on Tanya's shoulder. "You transformed something terrible into something that helps people," she said. Tanya smiled. "He helped me first," she replied. She glanced down at Milo. He blinked up at her, his tail wagging softly. He no longer required instructions. He was already prepared, and perhaps that was the intention. It's often the case that those who appear least imposing possess the most profound insights. And frequently, the most subdued voices resonate most powerfully, particularly when someone or something offers unwavering support. If you've reached this point, thank you. Consider this a prompt to pay close attention, especially when interacting with children, and to trust their instincts when they express discomfort. You may be the only person to do so. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. Remember, there's always someone waiting to be believed. A judge chuckled upon hearing that 17-year-old Naomi was representing her cousin in court, but the entire courtroom fell silent by the time she concluded her statement. The courtroom held a subtle aroma of coffee and aged floor polish. Fluorescent lights hummed above as Naomi Ellison proceeded through the double doors, holding a substantial manila folder close. Her walk was determined, though it was evident she had practiced it before a mirror. Her thrift store slacks were a little too short, the white shirt just slightly wrinkled, and her bun, braided tight and pinned, had loosened a little in the Georgia humidity. Despite this, she kept her head high. 17 years old, not a lawyer, not even a college student, she was present to defend her cousin, and she wasn't planning on being dismissed. It was late morning in the Berrien County Courthouse in Nashville, Georgia, a modest building where everyone knew everyone. This was not a courtroom known for dramatic proceedings. It typically handled minor traffic offenses, small claims, and occasional custody disputes. Judge Byron Talcott had served on the bench for almost 3 decades. People in town remarked that he seemed from an earlier era, a diplomatic way of noting his resistance to change and his limited acceptance of it within his courtroom. As Naomi announced her role as Deshaun Little's legal representative, Judge Talcott peered over his glasses, appearing bewildered. "You're what now?" he inquired, looking down at the docket. "I'm representing my cousin in this case," Naomi stated, her voice unwavering. "I prepared a written argument, and—" He interrupted her. "You're not a lawyer," he said, a slight laugh escaping his lips. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. It seemed impossible that she was young enough to drive, let alone practice law. Several individuals adjusted their positions to observe her more closely. A man seated in the rear even smiled, seemingly anticipating an amusing spectacle. Naomi remained composed. Her expression didn't change, and her hands were steady. She nodded once, opened her documents, and stated, with respect, "Your Honor, Georgia law permits individuals to represent others in non-criminal proceedings, provided both parties agree." Judge Talcott raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me he consents to this?" Deshaun, seated beside her in jeans and a t-shirt, leaned toward the microphone. "Yes, sir, I do." A subtle change permeated the atmosphere. Naomi cleared her throat and added, "I'm prepared to proceed if the court is willing." The judge reclined in his chair, pausing for an extended moment. Then he smirked and waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. This will be interesting." The bailiff, an older man named Wiggins, inclined himself forward a little, focusing his gaze on Naomi with a hint of curiosity rather than disapproval. Naomi organized her documents with precision. She positioned her handwritten notes before her, turning to the page marked Opening Statement. Her script was precise, so precise that it seemed impossible anyone could have written it hastily. As she prepared to speak, a laugh escaped someone situated in the back of the room. The judge made no move to quiet it, nor did Naomi. She simply commenced. Before she could elaborate further, the judge interrupted her once more. "Miss Ellison, for the sake of argument, could you please state where you obtained your law degree?" She met his gaze steadily. "I do not possess one, but I have dedicated the past 2 years to studying Georgia traffic law, civil procedure, and judicial conduct during my leisure time. I've attended public hearings in 3 counties, transcribed trial footage, and reviewed over 50 court opinions. I do not possess a degree, but I am present to ensure the court's time is used productively." The room was silent now. Even the clerk had ceased typing. However, Judge Talcott still had one more maneuver prepared. Judge Talcott exhaled audibly through his nose, seemingly considering whether this was a misuse of time or an opportunity for spectacle. He shifted slightly in his chair and offered Naomi a brief, dismissive gesture. "Very well, Miss Ellison." Naomi remained unfazed. She delivered her introduction with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it repeatedly. And she had. In her bedroom, she practiced, standing before a mirror with her backpack used as a makeshift podium. Her voice remained steady as she presented the details. Deshawn had been stopped by police for failing to stop at a stop sign outside the high school on a Saturday morning. There was no other traffic and no pedestrians present. Despite this, the infraction resulted in a court summons and a significant financial penalty. Naomi's goal wasn't merely to dispute the fine. She aimed for its complete dismissal. In the second row, a white woman wearing a peach blazer spoke softly to the man beside her. He responded with a chuckle and a shake of his head. The clerk reclined in her chair, clicking her pen, anticipating Naomi's misstep. And Deshawn? He glanced at his hands, apprehensive, perhaps even a little irritated. "You sure you want to do this?" He had asked her that morning while they waited outside the courthouse. Naomi had answered without lifting her eyes from her notes. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." He remained silent after that. Now, seated beside her at the defendant's table, he fidgeted in his chair, seemingly wishing he could vanish. He was 17 as well, but Naomi made him feel even younger simply by being next to him. Naomi then addressed the matter of selective enforcement. The stop sign in question had been disregarded by numerous drivers that morning, including 2 local sheriff's deputies. Naomi possessed video footage captured by a neighbor, which was time-stamped and easily discernible. The footage displayed vehicles proceeding without interruption. There were no visible lights, no audible sirens, and no issued citations. She positioned a small USB drive on the table and raised her gaze toward the judge. "With the court's permission, I'd like to submit this as evidence." Judge Talcott remained still for a moment. Then, deliberately, he turned his attention to the bailiff. "Let's take a look." The screen activated. The courtroom's attention focused. The video consisted of straightforward street footage captured by a home security camera. Vehicle after vehicle passed the sign without pausing. Naomi allowed the recording to play for 20 seconds before stopping it and indicating a license plate belonging to a county sheriff. "I'm not suggesting that the law shouldn't be enforced," she stated, "only that it should be enforced fairly." There was no laughter this time. The judge, however, crossed his arms. "And you believe this demonstrates your cousin was treated unfairly?" Naomi replied concisely. "It demonstrates that enforcement lacks consistency. And when enforcement lacks consistency, citations can become subjective." He observed her intently for a moment. Naomi remained composed under his gaze. What the majority of individuals present didn't realize, couldn't possibly know, was her dedication over the previous 2 summers, secretly attending hearings in 3 counties. She documented proceedings with a well-used pen, quietly reciting legal terminology into a tape recorder obtained from her science teacher. No one had instructed her in these actions. Her high school lacked law electives, and internship opportunities for girls like her were scarce in Berrien County. Consequently, she pursued self-study. She dedicated late nights to reading legal blogs and case opinions while her mom worked double shifts at the nursing home. She prioritized this over socializing, foregoing parties and school dances. It was her chosen path. Now, upon her first opportunity to apply her knowledge, those present perceived her as a young person pretending. "I'll accept her." The judge cleared his throat. "We'll admit the video for review." "Continue." Naomi nodded and kept going, but the atmosphere hadn't changed yet. People still looked at her as if this would inevitably fail. But then Naomi said something that even made the court reporter lift her head. Naomi placed her palms flat on the table, leaned in just a little, and said, "This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about accountability. The question of whether authority figures, including officers, are held to the same standards as those they stop." That specific phrasing resonated powerfully. It didn't appear scripted, but its impact was undeniable. A noticeable silence fell over the room, unlike any that had come before. The murmuring ceased, and the expression softened. The clerk paused her pin-chewing habit. Even Judge Talcott reacted, seemingly surprised by her candid remark. Deshawn observed his cousin with a newfound perspective. He had always recognized her intelligence. Family members had expressed similar sentiments. However, this situation felt different. Naomi proceeded swiftly, turning to the subsequent page of her materials. Her notes were meticulously organized with a color-coded highlighting system. Blue indicated facts, green represented legal principles, and yellow marked quotes she had committed to memory. She began discussing Owens versus State of Georgia, a 1999 case concerning traffic enforcement and racial bias. She methodically reviewed the court's opinion, detailing it line by line, and clarified how the court recognized that unequal enforcement damaged public confidence. The judge intervened. "Ms. Ellison, are you drawing comparison to the Owens case?" "That involved." She remained steady. "The relevant legal principles remain applicable, Your Honor. Selective enforcement compromises the fairness of any legal process, irrespective of whether it is criminal or civil." He reclined once more, his expression now neutral. The courtroom was fully engaged as well. The woman in the peach blazer now sat forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and intently listened. The man beside her put away his phone. Naomi proceeded. She presented traffic enforcement statistics from Willow Creek County, figures she had obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request and printed at the public library. The data revealed that 83% of traffic stops during the previous year involved black drivers, while census data indicated they comprised just under 40% of the population. She placed the documents before her. "I'm not suggesting anyone intentionally targeted my cousin," she stated. "The court is being asked to consider the established pattern. Ignoring patterns allows them to persist. This presentation is devoid of theatrics or raised voices. It is simply a recitation of facts and a quiet, direct assessment." Judge Talcott reviewed his notes, tapped his pen against the folder before him, then made a notation. The bailiff, Wiggins, folded his arms, not as an act of opposition, but in attentive listening. Deshawn murmured, "Yo, did you really obtain all those numbers?" Naomi murmured, her gaze fixed on the judge. "It took me 3 weeks." Deshawn blinked, surprised by the intensity of her statement. A cough echoed from a few rows behind. Yet no one chuckled. The judge remained silent, examining the printed documents before returning his attention to Naomi. "You've certainly done your homework, Miss Ellison," he observed. She offered a single nod, composed and prepared. Then, for the first time since she entered the courtroom, Naomi hesitated. The silence wasn't due to a lapse in her speech, but because she had arrived at the critical juncture of her argument. Her statement emphasized that the matter wasn't about achieving victory, it was about fairness. She affirmed that if the court found her cousin had indeed violated the law, they would abide by the decision. However, she insisted that if citations were to be issued in Cedar Creek County, they needed to carry consistent meaning regardless of the driver. This was the pivotal moment, not when she referenced legal precedent, nor when she presented the statistics. The sincerity of that statement seemed to resonate, and the judge closed his folder. "Let's take a 10-minute recess." Gasps weren't permitted in courtrooms, yet they were audible, noticeable in the subtle shifts of people and the murmured comment, "He never does that." During that brief pause, Naomi experienced her initial wave of genuine uncertainty. She sat on the unyielding wooden bench outside the courtroom, knees drawn close, hands tightly clasped around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. The braid at the nape of her neck was loosening, but she made no move to adjust it. She fixed her gaze straight ahead, seemingly observing something unseen by others. Deshawn sat next to her, his leg bouncing, his eyes darting frequently. "You good?" he eventually asked. She nodded, then murmured, "Yeah, but you don't seem it." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't come here to look good," he chuckled, then added more seriously, "Hey, thank you. For real. I didn't think you'd go that deep." She turned towards him. "You didn't think I meant it? I mean, I knew you were smart. I simply didn't realize you were this intelligent." Naomi did not respond. The courtroom door opened, and the bailiff motioned toward them. Let's return to the matter at hand. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter from before had disappeared, yielding to a more subdued feeling. It wasn't quite respect. It wasn't quite admiration. It was simply focused attention. Judge Talcott observed Naomi when she re-entered. This time, he didn't squint or smirk. He continued to evaluate her. "Miss Ellison," he stated as she resumed her testimony, "let's hypothetically consider, just for a moment, that your assertion is valid. Could you please reference any specific wording in the law that would directly justify dismissing your cousin's citation?" Naomi responded promptly. "Yes, sir. Georgia Code, Section 40 to 620 details proper stop sign enforcement, but it also allows for interpretation regarding situations where enforcement might be applied unevenly or selectively. Moreover, the Equal Protection Clause, as defined in Yick W. v. Hopkins, dictates that selective enforcement predicated on arbitrary distinctions compromises the law's legitimacy." The courtroom fell silent once more. The judge inclined himself forward, resting his elbows on his desk, observing her as if searching for a weakness. "I notice you're quite well informed," he remarked. "Yes, Your Honor." He then stated, his voice a little more pointed, that if she intended to cite Yick W., she should also be ready to discuss its relevance beyond licensing matters. She affirmed, explaining that the ruling's core principle extended beyond licenses. It concerned fairness under the law. The ruling explicitly stated that even seemingly neutral laws could not be applied in a discriminatory manner. For the first time, Judge Talcott refrained from interrupting, allowing her to complete her statement. He then folded his hands and looked directly at her. "Miss Ellison," he said, speaking almost calmly now, "what exactly do you want from this court?" Naomi took a breath. "I want my cousin's citation dismissed, and I want the court to acknowledge that enforcement patterns in this county deserve closer scrutiny." She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The judge examined the documents before him, then surveyed the courtroom, and lastly turned his gaze to Naomi. Unexpectedly, he posed a question. "May I review your notes?" Naomi was taken aback. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "Your notes. It's evident you've invested significant effort. I'd appreciate the opportunity to examine them." The inquiry was unusual. Judges rarely made such requests. Naomi approached and presented the notes. Her hand briefly touched the bench, but she maintained her balance. The judge examined the pages, methodically, handwritten, color-coded, and arranged with the precision of a junior associate at a leading downtown Atlanta firm. "This is remarkable," he stated after a prolonged pause. The courtroom remained silent. He then added, "However, you must understand that argument isn't always sufficient in court. Sometimes, regardless of how just you are, the structure doesn't yield." Naomi did not avert her gaze. "Then perhaps the structure requires pressure." The judge raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, someone in the gallery stood. The woman who stood in the back row appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back tightly and a black blouse buttoned to the neck. She seemed like someone who didn't speak unless it was important. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice steady but quiet. Judge Talcott turned slowly. "Ma'am, You need to sit down. This isn't open for public comment. But the woman did not flinch. I am Judith Minter. As a retired attorney with 41 years of experience in civil litigation, I feel compelled to state, for the record, that this young lady presented one of the most well-structured arguments I've observed in a courtroom, even among federal proceedings. While gasps weren't permitted, an audible intake of breath was clearly heard from half the gallery. Judge Talcott visibly stiffened but remained silent, simply observing Naomi. A fleeting, unreadable expression crossed his face. Frustration? Perhaps. Or something else entirely. He announced another recess. Naomi hurried outside. Her chest felt constricted, and her hands trembled slightly this time. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything. The room, the atmosphere, the abrupt quiet that followed the woman's statement. Deshawn followed her and sat next to her once more. "You all right?" he inquired. She hesitated before responding. Her fingers moved restlessly in her lap. "Why would she say that?" Naomi asked, almost to herself. "Why would someone like her defend me?" Deshawn shrugged, because she observed what everyone else had seen. Naomi allowed her shoulders to relax a little. Her entire body had been rigid for more than an hour, and she hadn't been aware of it. The courtroom doors opened again, and Naomi was surprised when Judith Minter emerged and approached her. "Miss Ellison," she said softly as she sat down next to her on the bench. "Do you understand the sort of bravery it requires to stand where you just stood? Particularly without the qualifications. That's not something that can be fabricated." Naomi began to speak, but Judith raised a hand. "I'm not attempting to compliment you," she said. "I'm stating a fact. And if you ever consider a career in law, I mean professionally, please contact me. I know individuals who would be fortunate to guide someone with your potential." Naomi paused, unsure how to respond. All she could say was, "Thank you." Judith smiled, then rose. "Finish well. Don't allow him to manipulate you. He possesses more intelligence than he conveys, but he's likely to show you deference if you remain perceptive." Following that, the woman vanished down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Deshawn turned to Naomi, a combination of awe and disbelief evident on his face. "Yo, who are you right now?" She offered a quiet, almost weary laugh. "I'm just me." However, something in her demeanor had shifted. The anxiety was still present, but it no longer dominated. Not entirely. The bailiff entered the room. "They're ready." Naomi stood, adjusted her shirt, and retrieved her folder. As she re-entered the courtroom, there were no whispers, no smirks, and Judge Talcott no longer leaned back as if dismissing her. Instead, he leaned forward. Naomi returned to the table, arranged her closing statement, and awaited approval. The judge offered a brief nod. "Proceed." She took a final breath to compose herself, and then she began. The words she was about to speak would silence the entire courtroom. Naomi spoke calmly, no need for raised tones. "My cousin is a teenager. He committed a minor error. But if the law isn't applied equally to all, young, old, black, white, officer, civilian, then it ceases to be law. It transforms into a suggestion, or, even more detrimentally, punishment for some and a caution for others." A stillness fell over the room. No one moved. Every gaze in that room was focused on her. Even the clerk, who had kept her fingers poised over the keyboard, was frozen midair. She continued, "We've all heard that justice is blind, but it shouldn't be deaf. It shouldn't ignore patterns, or silence people who speak up about them." Naomi walked slowly to the evidence table, pulled up the citation, and held it out. This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about the choice to enforce, or not enforce, the law based on who's in the driver's seat. Her voice remained steady, almost calm, but her words carried significant weight. She addressed the judge. "You inquired previously about what I sought from this court. I stated then that I desired the citation dismissed, and I maintain that desire. However, I also want recognition that fairness should not be something earned through appearances or background. It should be inherent, a given, for all." Judge Talcott looked down, tapping the citation folder again with the corner of his pen. He remained silent. "Not yet. I may not hold a degree," Naomi stated, but I've gained knowledge observing courtrooms and opinions and law books over the past 2 years. I've learned that when justice functions correctly, it isn't felt as dominance. It feels like understanding, like recognition that you were listened to. Her voice faltered just a little at that final word, not enough to disrupt her flow, but enough to serve as a reminder to those present that she remained a teenager, still human, still someone who shouldn't have been required to prepare for this. She closed her folder and stepped back. Silence. A full 10 seconds elapsed before Judge Talcott finally exhaled. He adjusted his glasses, surveyed the courtroom, then focused his eyes on Naomi. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said. "Long enough to recognize when someone enters this courtroom with something prepared, and when they enter with something authentic." He paused. "You, Miss Ellison, you presented something authentic." Another pause. "I am dismissing the citation. The issue isn't related to your cousin's connections, but rather the manner in which you presented this case. Furthermore, the evidence you offered prompted questions that this court cannot disregard." A murmur arose within the gallery, marked by surprise, quietness, and deference, yet he had not concluded. Judge Talcott moved forward, placing his hands on the desk. "To be candid, I initially found amusement in your presentation, and that was an error. You didn't simply prepare, you informed this courtroom, and myself included. You maintained your position in a setting not intended for someone of your stature to speak with authority. And I believe this will not be the last instance." He tapped the gavel once. Not forcefully, simply to conclude proceedings. Court is adjourned. Naomi remained still initially. Deshawn observed her as if she were an unfamiliar person. Or perhaps he was at long last perceiving the version of her that had always existed. Those present in the gallery did not immediately leave. Several approached her discreetly. The clerk even nodded once, murmuring, "Nice work, kid." Naomi held her folder close to her chest again. But now it didn't seem like a shield. It felt like a credential. As she and Deshawn walked out into the sun, he nudged her. "You're going to be on somebody's billboard one day." She laughed. "Not unless they catch me on a good hair day." He smiled wide. "Nah, I mean it. You changed something in there." Naomi looked ahead at the street, eyes squinting against the light. "I hope so." What followed would demonstrate that this instance marked merely the commencement of events. A week later, Naomi found herself once again in her bedroom, amidst piles of notebooks, scattered pens, and her aged school laptop adorned with discolored stickers. Her triumph at the courthouse had been reported in the local news. It wasn't extensive coverage, simply a few brief mentions in the Nashville Herald and a Facebook post from an individual who had been present in the gallery. However, the phone call that fundamentally altered the situation did not originate from a journalist. The call originated from the office of attorney Roland Brewster, located in Macon. She nearly ignored it, as the phone number was unknown and her mom had cautioned her against answering unrecognized calls. However, an intuition prompted her to answer. "Is this Naomi Ellison?" A voice inquired. "Yes," she replied. "This is Angela from the office of Roland Brewster. He would like to speak with you, if you're available." Naomi straightened on the bed. Certainly?" A click was heard. A man's voice then spoke, warm yet straightforward. "Naomi, my name is Roland. I've been practicing law in Georgia for 27 years. A colleague of mine, Judith Minter, sent me a copy of your court presentation. She said I'd be a fool not to reach out." Naomi remained silent initially, not due to nerves, as she wasn't feeling them. She was simply uncertain if it was genuine. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "It's not a job, yet, but it's a mentorship, one that could develop into something further. There's a summer program designed for young, creative thinkers. We want you to be a part of it." She discovered her ability to speak up. "But I haven't started college yet. I haven't even finished high school." He chuckled. "That's not important. We're not seeking degrees. We're looking for minds capable of sparking change." Naomi looked at her notes. The same ones she'd used in court, now spread across her desk like discarded awards. "I'm intrigued," she said. "Excellent," Brewster replied. "Please send me a copy of that argument." Following the call, Naomi remained still for an extended period. She didn't move or smile, simply taking everything in. A change had occurred. The courtroom proceedings were over. However, her personal journey, that unconventional path she had constructed independently, using library books and YouTube lectures, was no longer hidden. Her mom entered the room. "Are you hungry?" she inquired. Naomi nodded, feeling ravenous. Sitting opposite each other at the small kitchen table, her mom inquired, "Do you truly desire to pursue this? Law? Seriously?" Naomi ate her sandwich deliberately, then responded, "Yes. I believe I already am." Her mom offered a drawn-out, probing expression unique to mothers, and then nodded once. Following this, she stated, "Then you better continue demonstrating your capabilities." That evening, Naomi remained up reading, driven not by obligation, but by a sense of purpose. Analyzing legal precedent felt less like an assignment and more like a language she was finally proficient in. The following morning, she received another call, this time from a high school student from 2 towns over. "Hey," the girl said, "I saw what you did. My brother's case is similar. I don't know where to begin. Could I ask you a question?" And with that, Naomi evolved into something more, not just a bright student, not just a relative advocating for family. She stood as an illustration, a demonstration that excellence doesn't await authorization, and fairness doesn't demand a position, but only truth, clarity, and the courage to speak. She didn't require a law degree to impact a courtroom. She simply needed an opportunity. And when she received it, she ensured no one would ever perceive her identically again. Your voice doesn't need a platform. It merely needs to be heard. If Naomi's story resonated with you, ensure you subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. The key isn't the origin, but the level of dedication you demonstrate.